This is Tornado Talk, a podcast about one of nature's most fascinating phenomenon. Share your tornado story with us by email, Jen and Dan at tornadotalk.com.
That's Jen and Dan at tornadotalk.com.
Now, meteorologists Jennifer Naramore and Dan Holliday. Tornado Talk is on.
While tornadoes of all shapes and sizes can be picturesque, it is the wind they produce that leaves evidence of their strength.
One of the most knowledgeable scientists in the world when it comes to wind and storms is Tim Marshall.
He was born in Evergreen Park, Illinois, studied at Northern Illinois University, and eventually made his way to Tornado Alley. That's where he lives today, working at Hague Engineering in Irving.
He's continued to study the science in severe weather, playing a role in enhancing the Fujita scale, surveying storm damage, and conducting research to learn more about why tornadoes do what they do.
How did he become involved in enhancing the famous Fujita scale? What was the worst damage he ever surveyed? And he shares stories from the 2016 Twirl Project, placing pods in the paths of storms.
This is Tornado Talk, one-on-one with scientist, meteorologist, and structural engineer Tim Marshall.
Like many of us, the passion for weather occurred when we were little. Tim Marshall was no different. He was 10 when the Oakland tornado outbreak occurred in the upper Midwest in 1967. But it was a gift he would receive at Christmas time a year earlier that set the stage for one of the most brilliant careers in meteorology.
The fact that when you're young and you're kind of looking out and seeing about what the future lies for you, what interests you, I was very interested in science at the time already, and I was taking weather observations daily. My parents asked me what I wanted for Christmas, and I said a barometer, and so they got me a barometer for Christmas, which I was overjoyed with. So I was taking actually weather observations daily before this tornado happened, and I have my little logbook. And this tornado was something I had really, I've heard about tornadoes and I read about them, but I didn't think Chicago, Illinois was going to see a lot of tornadoes. It was outside of Tornado Alley. So I asked my parents, what are tornadoes? What are these things? And they said, well, they didn't know. They thought it was, some vortex that forms on a stormy day, and they had no clue. And in fact, they said, they heard that if lightning, you see a lot of lightning, you see a lot of lightning going around in a circle, that could mean the precursor for tornadoes. And so I was really curious about what tornadoes were, and I started studying. Of course, they didn't have the internet back then, So I had to write various people. I wrote the local TV meteorologists. I wrote Ted Fujita, and tried to get as much information as I could about tornadoes and a whole bunch of stuff. And, I was just read it and became fascinated with these things. So what are these things? And found a couple books on tornadoes at the library and read them up. And it just was an interest that has been from curiosity at the very beginning.
Aside of reading books about weather when he was a child, Tim said he watched the movie The Wizard of Oz more than 100 times, particularly the tornado scene.
And like many of us, he wanted to know how the show's creative team made a tornado look so real in a time when there wasn't technology yet available.
It's a twister! It's a twister!
I've always been fascinated by The Wizard of Oz. And I've always been fascinated. How do you, in 1939, in the age of where special effects, there's no computers, folks, how do you do that? How do you make the illusion of a tornado on the big screen? And so I read up on it. And there's a couple of great books out about The Wizard of Oz and a couple of little sections about how this tornado was created. And it was created with a windsock, like an airport windsock. Put on the stage, and there was a rod attached to the bottom of the sock, and somebody below the stage got to move it back and forth and make it look like it's, snaky going back and forth. But that was not convincing enough. So what they tried to do then is they have this Fuller's Earth, which is kind of a floury powder, and they decided to spray that up from the bottom of the stage and make it look like the tornado was digging up dirt, So they tried that. It looked pretty good, but not good enough. So they decided that they needed more of that, and they took a couple of panes of glass, and they spray painted on the glass cloud formations, dark cloud formations. And they moved these panes of glass back and forth, side to side, to look like a boiling sky. And again, this was done all before CGI, before all the special effects on computer. And I'm telling you, what they got out of that was just spectacular. And they kept spraying Fuller's Earth in. And they had a little model of Dorothy's farm. So when Dorothy's in the foreground, this model's in the background. And then they have this windsock moving back and forth. And of course, the sound they were able to create a sound like wind. And they did a great job, didn't they? I mean, it stands the test of time from 1939. It was one of the best tornado sequences I've ever seen on the big screen.
It almost looked more like a tornado than a real tornado. Really?
Yeah. And, they were able to, and of course they didn't know about this before, but they wanted to make it really dark and kind of hazy. But what they ended up doing was creating what appears to be a descending reflectivity core, which is the descending precip in the back of the tornado, like it's in the hook, it is, and the precip is coming on down, and that was just a dumb mistake, but I recognize it as pretty good. I mean, to make something that you didn't expect to be an actual phenomenon, which is that descending precip core in the back. So it's just amazing. I've watched that over and over again, and despite there's some interesting flaws up front. I mean, when Dorothy goes up to the porch and pulls the door comes off. Well, they have a fine wire. You can see that on some of the high-res imagery of the wire connected to the door. The door is pulled up when she opens the door, and then the winds are blowing the opposite direction when she comes out the back door. So it's like, well, wait a minute now. The winds are blowing left to right, now they're blowing right to left. How does that happen, And so there's a couple of weird things that happen during the scene shot, but of course, I always analyze these things way too much.
While Tim Marshall didn't see the famous Oaklawn tornado that killed more than 30 people just a few miles west of his home, he remembers the day that it happened.
The Oaklawn tornado back in '67 was near me, but I didn't see that because my parents told me to get down to the crawl space, and I did. And there was a lot of wind and hail and things. That was April 21, 1957, an F4. Back in those days, it was Fujita scale. F4 tornado hit. And my parents drove me around a couple of days later. My mom volunteered for the Red Cross, and I was able to see the damage firsthand. And wow, it was something like I had never seen before. And again, it sparks my curiosity and wanting to know, what is this thing that comes out of the sky on a stormy day and does such destruction? And that curiosity has been with me. The first tornado that I ever saw was the day I moved down to Texas, literally. I got a assistantship at Texas Tech, graduate school in meteorology, for my master's. And the first day I drove down, totally unforecasted in my book, I was just driving from point A to point B, Chicago to Lubbock, Texas, crosses the road in front of me. And so, holy cow, this is the place for me. What an omen to have to drive the very first day into Texas and see a tornado. And I was not chasing. It would just happen.
There'd be no better person to learn about tornadoes from than Mr. Tornado himself, Dr. Ted Fujita. In fact, when he was just a kid, Tim Marshall wrote to Dr. Fujita to gain more knowledge about storms. Dr. Fujita wrote back. The two would become acquainted, and eventually Dr. Fujita would become Tim's mentor.
It started out with just writing him as a kid and him sending me a bunch of tornado maps and pamphlets on tornadoes. And then as we went to college, we had a field trip down to see him after the super outbreak. It was November of '74. We went down to the University of Chicago. I got to meet him firsthand, got to hear him talk about what he found on the super outbreak. And from that point on, he's just been my mentor and idol. Really, what culminated in, I think, 1991 at one of the storm conventions was I was giving a talk. And who was in the front row, because he was speaking after me, but Dr. Ted Fujita. So he actually was listening to me speak. And it was just a tremendous, high for me to do that. And so, he was just an icon. Mr. Tornado is what people dubbed him, although he only saw, I think, one tornado in his life. He did a lot of damage surveys, and I love damage surveys. That's why I do what I do today, even. So he was really an inspiration to me.
Those who study Dr. Fujita's work say he was a visionary, and even he knew that his Fujita scale that rated the strength of tornadoes would constantly evolve, even after he was gone. Tim Marshall would become a part of that EF scale evolution.
Well, of course, Fujita developed this scale back in 1971. It was really an empirically derived scale. He felt that there were several levels of tornado intensity. And initially he felt there were like three, that there was just like pizza, I guess, a small, a medium, and a large, just intense tornado. And then he felt that there was probably something stronger than what he has seen, and there's probably something pretty weak that's almost like a landspouty kind of thing, although this was before landspouts were defined. And so he figured 5 levels of tornado intensity, which have stood the test of time. And he was a visionary. It wasn't until 1981 that he finally was able to produce a peer-reviewed, formally published paper on the Fujita scale. And that was only after the Weather Service started using this, and it became sort of like the Richter scale, kind of a simple, easy measurement of tornadoes that are producing damage. So it's really a damage scale. And it didn't really know how strong tornadoes were. I mean, if you have a 300-mile-an-hour tornado and you have a house that blows down and it's only going to be a 100-mile-an-hour wind that blows down a house, well, that's all you can rate it by, So you can only rate the damage. You really don't know what the intensity of the tornado is. So, but anyways, he developed this scale, and although the 5 indicators have stood the test of time, it was originally designed for houses only, just kind of a mono culture of homes, that each home was built the same, and therefore we can rate this uniformly across the board. Well, we know that that's not the case, that there are fatal flaws in building construction, that has to be considered when you're trying to determine the level of damage. If a house is not anchored and slides off its foundation and crumbles apart at 100 miles an hour, you got to know that. You got to reduce the scale. Well, he knew this was going to happen. He wrote a memoir shortly before his death, figuring that his Fujita scale is going to be changed in some way, shape, or form. He didn't know what, but he figured it was going to be changed. Well, after he passed, Texas Tech decided to get together and, with their engineers, develop an enhanced Fujita scale, an EF scale. And they asked me to be one of the 6 scientists to come up with the numbers for the wind speeds to basically correlate damage with wind speed. And so that's what I played a role in, and trying to develop an enhanced Fujita scale. And it wasn't just houses. It was 28 different damage indicators. It includes all kinds of buildings and hotels and schools. And it also includes trees and poles, like power poles and other things. And I'm still on the committee with the ASCE, which is the American Society of Civil Engineers, who wants to adopt a standard nationwide. And we're going to expand the enhanced Fujita scale. It's going to become a standard probably in the year 2020.
Back in 1977, David Hoadley started a magazine called Storm Track that was all about storm chasing. Less than 10 years later, Tim Marshall would become the magazine's editor. The publication grew to nearly 1,000 subscribers following the release of the movie Twister in 1996. That's the same year it developed a website that still continues today at stormtrack.org.
Tim Marshall loves sharing his passion passion and knowledge about weather. In addition to the articles written on Storm Track, he's published Storm Chase Manual, Storm Talk, the Tornado Forecaster's Workbook, and even the booklet, Tornado Talk. The hundreds of storm surveys he's been a part of have helped compile some of the information he's published. Out of all the storms he surveyed, we asked him which was the most devastating he'd ever seen.
I knew immediately when I saw the news of Joplin that there was going to be, close to an EF5 rating there, EF4, EF5. So I immediately headed up there, and that was not anything formally. I just did it on my own. And then I've been on a lot of formal surveys where the Weather Service calls me in and asks me to be part of their team to go out and assess the evaluation. One of the biggest projects we had was the April 2011 event in Alabama, where I had to survey the tornadoes in northern Alabama, and there were so many tracks, and they went so far. We couldn't do it all from the ground. We had to do it by helicopter and land at various places that we thought were, close to EF5 rating or EF4, EF5 rating. You take a look at those and coordinate with local sheriff's officials to pick us up and escort us to the area. So it's been, from just walking to aerial, both ground and aerial.
It's the research that Tim Marshall has been a part of recently and conducts today that helps further the science of storms. He talks about his involvement in the verification of the origins of rotation in tornadoes experiment, or Vortex 2.
I am very interested, as you know, to get back to science all the time. I work in a private company, and everything we do in the private company is pretty much confidential, and I can't really say what all the research that we do. And it's a shame, because I'd love to publish a lot of the stuff we've done. We've done some great work. So I want to get back to science, and I have put an APB out that, any of scientists out there that are doing field projects, I am game, especially with tornadoes. Let me know. So I've known Josh Werman for quite a long time, and his associate, Karen Kasiba, and I've made it known that, hey, if you're going to have a project, count me in, please, And so they did. They asked me to join them on the Center of Severe Weather Research back in 2009. And I'm telling you, I had an absolute blast with that, working with them and deploying pods in front of tornadoes. They wanted me to be on the lead probe vehicle. Because of my experience, they wanted to go ahead and have someone with experience right up front, because mostly what we have are graduate students, and they have rarely chased storms, maybe even have 1 year experience max. So they wanted somebody with experience up front. And so had a great time. We saw, 10 tornadoes that year. And it was just really an amazing time. Well, in 2010, they had Vortex 2, part 2, and they asked me back. And I've been with them now 4 times. 2012, they had their own private project, and this past year they had, back in 2012, it was called Rotate, and then this year it was called Twirl, same kind of project, and I was out with them for like 52 days or something. It was, again, I really enjoy it. We had 2 probe hits this year, and they got great data, and there'll be some future papers for sure.
On May 9th, 2016, Tim Marshall and the Twirl researchers were in the field when tornadoes wreaked havoc in south-central Oklahoma.
The first hit was in the sulfur wedge that occurred. We were able to follow that tornado and get in front of it. We actually saw the first tornado over near Wynnewood, and then which was a small tornado and was not really deployable. We tried deploying pods on it, but the tornado was too small. Very intense, but too small. The second tornado, much bigger, you have a much better chance. So I was able to race ahead of the tornado and watch and wait for it to come towards us, and was wobbling a little bit. We thought that, okay, let's deploy here. So we deployed, and the tornado just hit it on the north end. And the pod was heavily damaged, broke the vane, pitted the mast with the gravel from the road. really did a number on it. And so, I don't know the exact numbers because they do, but I think it was somewhere around 45 meters per second, somewhere in that range was a peak that they found. And they want they want a whole bunch of pods in the tornado. And they want it near the core flow region, and we were outside that, but we still got great data. And the nice thing about it is there was a Dow parked nearby, and they're able to correlate the Dow with the actual sensor, and that is something that has never been done before. So this is great science, and I'm really happy to be part of it. And we had 2 incidences where we had this happen. We had it on the Sulphur Wedge, and we had it on one of the Dodge City tornadoes, where pods were actually hit with the Dow working.
That leads to an interesting question. Some meteorologists say they would like to see mobile radar data wind speeds and storm damage surveys used together in determining the magnitude of a tornado's strength. How does Tim feel about that?
Well, we always need to maintain one. You start getting into multiple scales, and it gets to be really complex. So we need to maintain one. But we also need to state where the observation is coming from. I mean, if you go out and do a field survey and you're rating a house or a school on damage, then you just need to indicate that this is a damage-based number. If you have a Dow rating, then you need to indicate that it's a Dow-based number. The problem with Doppler on wheels is that radar does not measure wind. It is an instantaneous value of energy that comes back to the radar, and that it gets deciphered through a bunch of algorithms on what the speed could be. And it's not a point measurement. It is an area-weighted measurement based on reflectivity, and it's measuring kind of an average in a volume. So this is a problem, and that volume is huge. So we're comparing apples and oranges when we try to talk about what's a point measurement versus what radar does. And so for right now, the Weather Service has been directed not to include Doppler on wheels measurements in their evaluation. I think it'll eventually happen, but I think you need to use it as a grain of salt that it is apples versus oranges. There needs to be some way to compare a Doppler on wheels measurement with an actual measurement. Maybe there could be towers, instrumented towers that are there during like a gust front or something, and then you have a Doppler on wheels nearby and you measure that and compare the two. What's the readings on the wind tower versus what the readings are on the Doppler on wheels. Try to do some calibration.
Tim Marshall knows the risks of wanting to see tornadoes up close when doing research, and for anyone who storm chases in a more technologically advanced world. There are plenty of distractions with laptops and smartphones in the car, but now there's more traffic.
Obviously, the more people there are on the road, the more chances of problems that can occur. And it only takes a few bad apples to make it really bad for everybody. I know law enforcement in certain places of the country are tired of storm chasers and would like to see it outlawed. And, that has some support locally, but nothing in a statewide manner yet. We're, at that stage where we just have to be responsible for everybody. Everybody's got to be responsible. Now, fortunately, this year and with Twirl, we didn't find any real hang-ups. Of course, we were on secondary roads a lot, so I can't really say, like for Dodge City, for example, people were saying, oh, there's such a long line of traffic on that highway south of Dodge. Well, we weren't really on there very much. I mean, we initially were, and then we got off that on secondary roads, and so that wasn't a problem for us traffic-wise. But I've heard stories and I've seen some video. Of course, people stopping on the road, car doors open in the road, people running across the road, and I've seen that in the past where people will park on the right side of the road and then run across to the left, and they're not paying attention. They're looking at the tornado and they're just running across the road, and somebody's going to get hit someday. I mean, it's just going to happen, and that could be bad for us. So we don't want that to happen at all. Now, I had thought that maybe when Tim Samaras was killed, that maybe people would take another look at being very, very close. And unfortunately, that's not the case. It's probably even more so now. I've seen more close-up videos than ever before. You got to understand that, like in Dodge City, for example, you can have one tornado and then another one form nearby. And the beauty of the Dows that we were with was that the Dows were seeing ground circulation many minutes before we actually had a visible contact. So that's another hazard. Invisible tornadoes that can occur where you have a tornado forming, and it takes many minutes for that condensation to finally work its way down. But they're pretty strong. We saw circulations over 100 miles an hour at the ground without any kind of visible. You could see something, maybe a little white spot, like a swirl down there at the ground level, but you have to be right there to see it. And that poses hazards. There are tornadoes near tornadoes. I just want people to chase safely. I know they're going to chase out there, and I want them to be like I was when I was a kid, read up on everything you can about tornadoes. The internet makes it so easy to learn about tornadoes, so do your homework, because tornadoes can be somewhat erratic in their movements, and you don't want to be caught in a tornado. So keep your distance and just stay safe.
Next on Tornado Talk, August 26, 2007, a deadly EF4 tornado tears apart the community Northwood, North Dakota. How the storm formed, the aftermath, and how the town has come back following a devastating blow. It's Nightmare in Northwood on episode 18 of Tornado Talk.
This has been Tornado Talk. Take a moment to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Just search for Tornado Talk. Tornado Talk is free to you, but not free to produce. If you love what you hear, please support the show by becoming a member of Team Tornado Talk. It helps keep us going. Your monthly membership starting at $5 a month can earn you cool rewards like a Tornado Talk t-shirt, cap, koozies, and more. Plus, you'll always find free access to our past episodes. Just click the Patreon button online at tornadotalk.com.